She didn't cry when she saw them together, and that was what scared her the most. Because the moment Avery Jackson realized the man she loved had slept with her own sister, something inside her went completely quiet, like her heart had finally understood what her mind had been trying to ignore all along, that she had never truly been chosen. And as she stood there watching Caitlin smile into the same lips that once promised her forever, she made a decision without saying a word, without creating a scene, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She walked away, and that night, she stopped being the girl who waited to be loved and became the woman who would never settle for less again. Before we dive in deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Avery Jackson had always been the one people overlooked, not because she lacked anything, but because she was surrounded by people who chose convenience over truth. Her mother died when she was young, and the home that was supposed to protect her slowly became a place where she learned to survive instead. Her stepmother never hid her dislike, and Caitlin, her half-sister, grew up knowing she could take anything she wanted without consequence. Attention, affection, opportunities, and eventually, even the man Avery thought was hers. Because Finn was never loyal, he was simply comfortable until something more beneficial came along, and Caitlin made sure she became that something. That betrayal did not destroy Avery. It reshaped her, because instead of staying where she was not valued, she left, quietly, completely, and built a life far away from the people who had defined her as replaceable. She worked harder than she ever had before, pushed herself beyond what anyone expected, and over time, she became someone new, a successful lawyer with her own firm, respected, composed, and no longer searching for validation from anyone who had once ignored her. And when she finally returned to the States, it was not because she needed them, it was because she had nothing left to prove. Back in that same house, Caitlin was preparing for the life she believed she deserved, a wedding into the Knight family, a name that carried wealth, influence, and everything she had always chased. Because to Caitlin, love had never been the goal, status was, and Finn Knight represented exactly that. Or at least, that was what she believed, until days before the wedding, when she overheard something that changed everything. A quiet conversation. A single truth: Finn was not the one who held the real power. He had money, yes, but he was not the center of the empire. The real authority belonged to someone else. Xavier Knight. The name carried weight in a way that unsettled her, because the more she paid attention, the clearer it became. Xavier was the one people answered to, the one who controlled decisions, the one who actually held the position she wanted. And suddenly, marrying Finn no longer felt like winning. It felt like settling, and Caitlin had never been someone who settled. So instead of moving forward, she did what she always did when things did not align with her expectations: she ran. The wedding was left in chaos, the alliance at risk, and Mr. Jackson, furious and desperate to protect his reputation, made a decision that would pull Avery back into everything she had left behind. He called her with urgency, told her their grandmother was sick, and despite everything, Avery returned, unaware that the truth waiting for her was not just about illness, but about obligation. They told her the family needed this alliance, that the business was failing, that the only way to fix everything was through the marriage Caitlin abandoned. And when she asked who she was expected to marry, the answer made her go completely still. Finn Knight, the same name connected to everything she had once lost. Avery wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk away again, to leave them to deal with the consequences of their choices. But then they reminded her of her grandmother, and this time, it was real. So she made a decision, not out of love, not out of loyalty, but out of something deeper. She would do it, but on her terms. In her mind, this marriage would last 6 months, nothing more, no emotions, no attachment, and certainly no forgiveness. The wedding day arrived with tension hanging in the air, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. Avery stood there dressed as a bride for a life she had not chosen, surrounded by people who cared more about appearances than truth. And for a moment, she wondered how everything had led her back to this place, where her future could be decided without her consent. And then Finn didn't show up. At first, there were whispers, then confusion, then quiet panic spreading across the room as it became clear that the groom had disappeared. And just when everything seemed like it was about to fall apart, the doors opened. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to make the room fall silent. Because the man who walked in was not Finn, and even the people who didn't know his name felt his presence immediately. Xavier Knight didn't rush. He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He simply walked forward like a man who had never needed permission to enter any room. And when his eyes finally landed on Avery, something shifted, not in the room, but in her. Because for the first time that day, she didn't feel like she was being forced into something. She felt like something unexpected had just begun. The room did not question him, and that was the first thing Avery noticed. Because in a space filled with influential people, people who were used to control, used to being heard, used to being important, no one spoke when Xavier Knight walked in. No one asked why he was there instead of Finn. No one dared to interrupt the quiet authority that followed him. And Avery, who had spent years learning how power moved between people, recognized it immediately. This was not a man who needed to explain himself. This was the man others adjusted themselves around. She should have been angry. She should have refused. She should have walked away the moment she realized the situation had changed again without her consent. But instead, she found herself watching him, trying to understand why everything about his presence felt different from what she had prepared herself for. Because Xavier was not like Finn, he was not trying to impress anyone. There was no charm, no performance, no attempt to make the moment lighter than it was. He simply stood there, calm, composed, as if this unexpected turn of events was nothing more than a minor adjustment in a plan he already controlled. And then he spoke, not loudly, not forcefully, but in a way that made it impossible to ignore. And when he agreed to proceed with the marriage, it wasn't framed as a favor. It wasn't presented as something he was doing for the families involved. It sounded like a decision, one that had already been made before anyone else realized what was happening. And for the first time since she returned, Avery felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but awareness, because this man, this stranger who had just replaced the groom without hesitation, was not someone she could predict. The ceremony went on, not because it was perfect, but because stopping it would have created a bigger disruption than continuing. And as Avery stood across from Xavier, repeating words she had not written for a life she had not planned, she expected to feel trapped, to feel like she was once again being forced into something she did not choose. But instead, what she felt was something far more unsettling. She felt seen, not in the way Finn once looked at her, not in the way people observe beauty or status, but in a way that suggested Xavier understood exactly what kind of situation she had been placed in and had chosen to step into it anyway. When it was over, when the signatures were complete and the room slowly returned to its usual rhythm of conversation and calculated politeness, Avery realized something that made her grip tighten slightly. She was no longer entering a temporary arrangement with someone she intended to punish. She was now tied to a man who did not behave like someone who could be controlled. And that realization unsettled her more than anything else that had happened that day. Xavier, on the other hand, did not linger. He did not stay to entertain conversations or accept congratulations. He acknowledged only those he needed to, spoke briefly with his father, and then turned his attention back to Avery, not with curiosity, not with judgment, but with a level of focus that made it clear she was now part of something he intended to handle personally. And when he told her they were leaving, it was not a suggestion, yet there was no force behind it, only certainty, and, for reasons she could not fully explain, Avery followed. The drive was quiet, not uncomfortable, but intentional, as if silence itself was part of how Xavier controlled his environment, and Avery, who had once filled silence with questions, with explanations, with attempts to understand what others were thinking, found herself doing something she had not done in a long time. She waited, because something told her that with Xavier, information would not be given easily. It would come when he decided it was necessary. When they arrived at his residence, the scale of it was exactly what she expected from the Knight family. But it was not the luxury that caught her attention. It was the order, everything in its place, everything controlled, everything reflecting a man who did not allow chaos into his space. And as she stepped inside, Avery reminded herself of the promise she had made before this marriage ever happened. 6 months, no emotions, no attachment, no vulnerability. She would not let this situation change her. She would not let another man have the power to affect her the way Finn once did. But Xavier had already begun to challenge that without saying a word. Because when he finally spoke to her alone, when there was no audience, no expectations, no pressure from either family, he did not ask her to play the role of a wife. He did not demand obedience. He did not even pretend that this marriage was something it clearly was not. Instead, he acknowledged it for exactly what it was, an arrangement created under pressure, built on circumstances neither of them chose. And then he said something that shifted everything again. He told her that she was free to leave if she wanted to, that he would handle the consequences, that he did not require her to stay in a situation she did not accept. Avery did not respond immediately, not because she didn't understand him, but because she did, and that was the problem, because for the first time since everything began, she was being given a choice, a real one, not one disguised as obligation or guilt, and instead of relief, what she felt was hesitation, because leaving would mean returning to the life she had already outgrown, the life where she was overlooked, underestimated, and expected to adjust, while staying meant stepping into something unknown, something she could not control, something that involved a man who had already proven he was not like anyone she had dealt with before. And as she stood there, looking at Xavier, trying to decide whether to walk away or stay, she realized something that unsettled her more than anything else. Avery should have left that night. That was the logical choice, the safe choice. The version of her that had spent years rebuilding herself would have walked away without hesitation, but logic had never felt this complicated before, because Xavier Knight did not try to convince her to stay. He did not use pressure. He did not remind her of the consequences. He simply gave her the option and stepped back. And somehow that made it harder to leave, because for the first time, she was not being forced into a decision. She was being trusted to make one. So she stayed, not because she understood him, not because she trusted him, but because something about walking away felt unfinished. Days passed, and the marriage did not feel like a marriage. There were no expectations placed on her, no forced conversations, no attempt to create closeness where none existed. Xavier moved through his world with the same quiet control she had seen the first day, focused, distant, but always aware, and Avery found herself watching him in ways she did not intend, noticing how he listened more than he spoke, how people adjusted their tone around him without realizing it, how nothing about him felt rushed or uncertain. It unsettled her, because men like Finn were easy to understand. They showed you what you wanted to see. They said what needed to be said. They made you feel chosen until something better appeared. But Xavier was different. He did not try to be liked. He did not offer attention freely. And yet, there was a consistency in him that made her feel something she had not felt in a long time. Stability. And that was dangerous. Because Avery had built her new life on control, on independence, on never needing anyone again. And now she was in a situation where the one person she was supposed to keep distance from was the only one not trying to take something from her. Back in the Jackson house, Caitlin was not handling things the same way. At first, she believed everything would settle, that the situation would be corrected, that somehow she would still get what she wanted. But as days turned into weeks and no one came to fix what she had broken, reality began to settle in. The marriage had gone on without her. The alliance had been secured without her. And the position she had spent so long chasing now belonged to the one person she had always looked down on, Avery. And for the first time, Caitlin felt something she was not used to feeling. Loss, not just of the marriage, but of control. Because no matter how she tried to explain it to herself, no matter how she justified her decision to walk away, one truth remained. Avery was now part of the Knight family, not as a replacement, but as the wife of the man who actually held power, Xavier Knight. And that was something Caitlin could not ignore. Meanwhile, Avery's past was not as far behind her as she thought, because Finn had been watching. The moment Avery Jackson heard his name again, not from memory, not from the past, but from the present, standing in the same space as her, she understood something immediately. Not everything that ends stays buried. Some things return, not because they matter, but because they refuse to accept that they no longer do. And when Finn stepped forward, carrying the same face, the same voice, the same presence that once meant everything to her, she felt something she never thought she would feel. Again, nothing. Because the man standing in front of her was no longer the one who broke her. He was simply someone who no longer had access to her. Finn had not planned it this way. Not the wedding, not the humiliation, not the way everything slipped out of his control the moment Caitlin disappeared. Because when he found out she ran, his first instinct was not to fix things, it was to protect himself. He knew Avery. He knew what he had done to her. And more importantly, he knew she was not the kind of woman who would forget. And the thought of being tied to her in a marriage where he would have no control unsettled him enough to do what he always did when things became uncomfortable. He walked away. He did not show up. And for the first time, his absence cost him something he did not expect. Because when he returned, when he came back thinking he could explain, adjust, reclaim some version of what he believed was still his to reach, he found something else entirely. Avery, standing beside his uncle, Xavier Knight, not as someone forced into place, but as someone who belonged there. And that was not something he was prepared for. He approached her carefully at first, not with arrogance, but with confusion hidden beneath confidence, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly, how the woman he once dismissed had become the one standing in a position he could no longer reach. And when he spoke her name, it carried something new. Uncertainty. But Avery did not respond the way he expected. She did not hesitate. She did not react. She did not acknowledge the past in the way he needed her to. Because for Avery, that chapter had already closed the moment he chose her sister over her, and reopening it now would mean giving it importance it no longer deserved. Finn tried to explain, not fully, not honestly, but enough to ease his own discomfort. He told her he didn't show up because he knew she would make his life difficult, that marrying her would have turned into something he couldn't control. And as he spoke, Avery realized something that made everything clearer than it had ever been before. He had never chosen Caitlin over her. He had chosen himself, and he would always choose himself. So when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, untouched by the weight of everything he had done. She told him something simple, something that ended whatever he thought still existed between them. She told him that he was right not to show up, because if he had, he would have realized too late that she was no longer someone he could walk away from. And this time, she would have been the one to leave. Finn wasn't prepared for that. Not for the confidence. Not for the absence of pain. Because in his mind, Avery was supposed to still be affected, still be reachable, still be someone he could influence, and the fact that she wasn't unsettled him in a way he could not hide. And that was when Xavier stepped in. Not abruptly, not aggressively, but with a presence that ended the conversation without needing to interrupt it. He did not ask questions. He did not demand explanations. He simply stood beside Avery, and in that single action, everything that needed to be understood became clear. Because Xavier Knight did not position himself without reason. And when he finally spoke, his tone remained calm, controlled, but carried a weight that Finn recognized immediately, not as anger, not as rivalry, but as authority, the kind that did not need to prove itself. He made it clear, without unnecessary words, that whatever existed between Finn and Avery belonged to the past, and more importantly, it had no place in the present. And for the first time, Finn understood. This was not a situation he could step back into. This was something he had lost completely. Because Avery was no longer within his reach. She was standing beside the one man in that family he could never compete with. His uncle, Xavier Knight. And as the silence settled, as the reality of that moment became impossible to ignore, something shifted not just in Finn, but in Avery as well. Because this time, she did not feel like she had been left behind. She felt like she had moved forward. And for the first time since everything began, she did not see this marriage as something temporary. She saw it as something that might change her in ways she had not planned. Later that night, when they returned home, the silence between them carried a different weight, not empty, not distant, but aware, as if something unspoken had shifted into place. And when Xavier finally addressed it, he simply said that if the past ever tried to follow her into his space, it would be dealt with, not aggressively, not possessively, but with a certainty that left no room for doubt. Avery turned to look at him then, really look at him, because there was something in the way he said it that caught her attention. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't control, it was protection, quiet, deliberate, and offered without expectation, and that unsettled her more than anything else, because she wasn't used to being protected without conditions. She didn't respond immediately, not because she didn't understand him, but because she was trying to understand why his words affected her the way they did, and for a moment, She considered reminding herself of the rules she had set. 6 months, no emotions, no attachment. But those rules felt less certain now, less solid than they did before she met him. And Xavier noticed that too. He noticed the way her guard didn't rise as quickly, the way her silence was no longer defensive but thoughtful, the way she didn't step away when the distance between them closed slightly. And while he did not move closer, did not push, there was a shift in him as well, subtle, controlled, but present, because for a man who had built his life on discipline and structure, feeling something unexpected was not something he ignored. It was something he observed carefully. Days turned into something neither of them addressed directly, but both were aware of, the space between them becoming less defined, conversations becoming slightly longer, silences becoming less necessary, and Avery found herself noticing things she had not intended to notice. The way Xavier remembered details she mentioned once and never repeated. The way he adjusted things around her without making it obvious. The way his presence, once unfamiliar, was beginning to feel steady. And that scared her, because stability was not something she trusted easily. Not anymore. But before she could fully understand what was changing between them, something else happened. Caitlin returned. Not quietly, not uncertain, but with intention, as if she had convinced herself that the situation was still hers to control. And when she walked into the same space Avery now occupied, carrying the same confidence that had once allowed her to take whatever she wanted, she was not prepared for what she saw. Because Avery was no longer standing behind her. Avery was standing above her. And this time, there was no place left for Caitlin to take. Caitlin did not hesitate. She had never been the kind of person who tested the waters before stepping in. She walked straight toward Avery with the same confidence that had once allowed her to take everything that mattered without consequence. But this time, something was different, because as she stood there, close enough to see every detail of Avery's expression, she realized there was no hesitation in her, no insecurity, no trace of the girl she used to overshadow. And for the first time, Caitlin felt something unfamiliar settle beneath her confidence, something she refused to name but could not ignore. She started with a smile, soft, almost friendly, the kind that hid more than it revealed, and she spoke as if nothing had happened, as if the past had not been built on betrayal, as if the wedding she abandoned had not forced Avery into a position she never asked for. But beneath the surface, every word carried intent. She questioned Avery's place subtly, suggested that everything she had now was never truly meant for her, that it was temporary, borrowed, something that could be taken back just as easily as it had been given. Avery listened without interrupting, without reacting, and that alone unsettled Caitlin more than anger would have, because she had always relied on provoking emotion, on creating reactions she could control, but there was nothing to control here. And when Avery finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, untouched by the weight Caitlin was trying to place on her, and she said something simple. Something that cut through every layer of pretense Caitlin had built around the situation. She told her that if something was truly meant for her, she would have stayed and claimed it, not run from it. That was the first crack. Caitlin's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough to reveal the frustration she was trying to keep hidden, because Avery had done something she wasn't supposed to do. She had refused to play the role of the replaced sister. She had refused to feel lesser, and instead of defending her position, she had exposed Caitlin's weakness, the fact that when faced with uncertainty, Caitlin chose to run. But Caitlin was not done. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, letting the softness drop completely as she said what she had been holding back, that Avery didn't belong in that world, that no matter how much she tried to act like she did, people like her would always be temporary, always be replaceable, and that sooner or later, the Knight family would realize it. And that was when Xavier stepped in. Not loudly, not aggressively, but with a presence that shifted the entire atmosphere without effort, because the moment he moved, the space between Avery and Caitlin was no longer open. It was controlled, and Caitlin, who had walked in with confidence, felt it immediately, the difference between being in a room and being in his space. Xavier did not look at Caitlin first. He looked at Avery, as if confirming something silently, as if making sure she was not affected in the way Caitlin intended. And when he finally turned his attention to Caitlin, his expression did not change, but there was something in his gaze that made her straighten slightly, something that reminded her of the reality she had tried to ignore, that the position she walked away from was no longer available to her. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to, and when he spoke, it was direct, controlled, and final. He told Caitlin that whatever assumptions she had about Avery's place were irrelevant, because Avery was not there by accident. She was there because he allowed it, and more importantly, because he chose it. That word lingered. Chose. Because it was not about obligation, not about the arrangement, not about the circumstances that led to the marriage. It was about decision. And for the first time since she returned, Avery felt something shift in a way she could not ignore, because Xavier had not just defended her position, he had defined it. Caitlin felt it too. And for once, she had nothing to say, because there was no argument against a choice made by the person who held the power she wanted. So she stepped back, not defeated, but aware. And that awareness was far more dangerous than anger. Because Caitlin did not accept loss easily. She adjusted. She planned. She waited. And Avery knew it. She could see it in the way Caitlin's expression settled, in the way her silence carried intention rather than surrender. And for a moment, she considered what this meant, that this was not over, that whatever came next would not be as simple as confrontation. It would be something more calculated. But what unsettled her more than Caitlin's reaction was Xavier. Because when they were alone again, when the tension of that moment had passed and the quiet of his space returned, Avery turned to him, not with gratitude, not with expectation, but with a question she had not planned to ask. Why? Why did he step in like that? Why did he say it like that? Why did it feel like more than just an arrangement? And Xavier did not answer immediately. He looked at her in that same way he always did, steady, observant, as if measuring something he had not yet decided to reveal. And when he finally spoke, his words were simple, but they carried a weight that Avery felt before she fully understood it. He told her that he does not protect things that do not matter. And then he walked away, leaving her standing there, with a truth she was not ready to face. Because for the first time since this began, Avery Jackson realized this was no longer just a marriage she planned to survive. It was becoming something she might not be able to walk away from. Caitlin did not make her move immediately. She waited, watched, studied the space Avery now occupied as if she could find a weakness hidden beneath the confidence. Because people like Caitlin did not accept losing, they adapted, and when they could not take something directly, they found a way to break it instead. And this time, she understood that going after Avery openly would not work, not with Xavier involved, not with the position Avery now held. So she chose something more precise, something that did not require confrontation, only timing. The opportunity came through something Avery never expected to be used against her, her grandmother. The one person she had agreed to all of this for. Caitlin found a way in, through connections, through influence, through the same quiet manipulation she had always relied on. And what she did was not loud enough to raise immediate suspicion, but calculated enough to create a crisis, a delay in treatment, a complication that should not have happened. And when Avery received the call, when she heard that her grandmother's condition had suddenly worsened, everything else disappeared. The control she had built, the calm she had maintained, the distance she had tried to keep, all of it gave way to one thing. Fear. Real fear. The kind she had not felt in years. And when she arrived at the hospital, when she saw the situation for herself, when she realized that something had been interfered with, that this was not just bad timing or medical error, something inside her cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to shake the foundation she had been standing on, because for all the strength she had built, for all the independence she had claimed, there was still something she could not control. Loss. And for the first time since she returned, Avery Jackson broke. Not in front of everyone, not where it could be used against her, but in a quiet moment, alone, where the weight of everything finally reached her, the betrayal, the pressure, the choices she had made, and the possibility that even after everything, she might still lose the one person she came back for. Xavier found her like that. He had been informed of the situation before she even arrived, because nothing that involved Avery stayed outside his awareness for long. And when he saw her, when he saw the composure she had maintained for everyone else slip just enough to reveal what she was holding back, something in him shifted in a way that was no longer subtle, no longer distant, because this was no longer about observation. This was personal. He did not ask her to explain, He did not offer empty reassurance. He simply stepped in, took control of the situation in the same way he handled everything else. Precise, immediate, effective. The best specialists were brought in. The delays were corrected. The interference was traced. And within hours, what had been uncertain became stable again. But he did not stop there. Because when the truth surfaced, when it became clear that what happened was not accidental, that someone had deliberately interfered, Xavier did not react with anger. He acted, and Caitlin learned very quickly what that meant. There was no confrontation, no dramatic exposure, no public scene, just consequences, quiet, irreversible consequences that dismantled the position she had been trying to rebuild, connections withdrawn, opportunities closed, influence stripped piece by piece until there was nothing left for her to stand on. And by the time she realized what was happening, it was already done. Xavier did not warn her. He did not need to, because men like him do not repeat themselves. They conclude. And when it was over, Caitlin was no longer a threat. She was a reminder of what happens when you mistake opportunity for entitlement. But none of that mattered to Avery in that moment. Because when she turned to Xavier, when everything had settled just enough for her to think clearly again, she realized something that unsettled her more than anything Caitlin had done. He had done all of this for her, not for the arrangement, not for the family, not for reputation, for her. And for the first time, she did not question it. She did not try to distance herself from it. She did not remind herself of the rules she had set, because those rules no longer made sense. Not when the one person she was supposed to keep distance from had become the one person who showed up when it mattered most. So when she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, not weak, but honest in a way she had not allowed herself to be in a long time. And she asked him something she had been avoiding since the day they met. Why? Why her? Why this? Why now? And Xavier looked at her, not the way he had before, not measured, not distant, but directly, with a clarity that left no space for misinterpretation. And when he answered, it was not a long explanation, not something carefully constructed, just the truth, simple, controlled, and deeper than anything she expected. He told her that he had spent years surrounded by people who chose based on advantage, on convenience, on what they could gain, and that the day she walked away from that wedding, the day she chose uncertainty over control, she became the only person in that room he did not have to question. And then he said something that stayed with her. He told her that he does not hold on to things lightly, but when he chooses, he does not let go. There was no dramatic confession, no grand declaration, no moment designed to impress, just certainty, the same certainty that had defined him from the beginning. But this time, it was not directed at a situation. It was directed at her. And Avery understood. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough to know that what she had planned to end in 6 months had already changed into something she was no longer trying to escape. Because for the first time in her life, she was not being tolerated. She was not being replaced. She was not being chosen out of convenience. She was being chosen deliberately. And this time, she chose back, not out of pressure, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. And in the end, the girl who was once overlooked in her own home did not just find her place. She became someone no one could ever replace. And the man who never needed to prove his power chose to give it meaning by choosing her. Before we close this story, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.